What it is, y'all, it's your old boy Pilk, and we need to talk about Wistoria episode 11 versus chapters 17 to 19. Yes, this is a triple, well, two and a half technically, chapter episode. You'll see what I mean when we get into it. There's just so much to cover, and it slightly changes my perspective on the episode a little bit. So we're going to kick off here at the beginning of volume 15. And we're jumping right in. And immediately as this episode kicks off, of course, they call it, we didn't talk about this before, they call it the 1 to 1,000 rules. So essentially, every monster in the dungeon is worth a set number of points. We found out the Grand Duke is worth 270 points, and some monsters are only worth 1,000, but that's like, I say 1,000, only worth one, and that's worth 1,000 points in like the whole magical school scenario. So you find out that the evil Grand Duke is worth 270,000 points. So way more than enough for Will to graduate. So little foreshadowing there, if you didn't figure that one out. But the big thing I noticed here, and as we kind of get into this chapter, you'll figure it out pretty quick. So right out of the chute, he's like, everybody run. Just get. There's no beating this thing. This thing is just too big, too massive, and too tough. Get out of here. And I noticed it immediately, like, with this, because what I did to prep for this episode is I watched the episode and I read the manga side by side, and I actually focused on a few key moments, and this was one of the moments I focused on. Prior, every other chapter, there are moments in the chapter where there's, like, pivotal facial expressions and moments like these. They would perfectly emulate this in the episode. And that didn't happen this time. In fact, there are very few sequences that were actually done properly here. And it kind of leads me down an interesting path. So we'll talk about that as we get towards the end, because there's a couple things in the actual closing sequence that I did notice. But kind of jumping back into the chapter here, everything kind of plays out exactly like you saw in the episode. Wingnall's like, okay, you guys are taking off. Cool. He goes out there and he does his illusion magic. And, it basically happens almost like it does in the episode, where he, all these plants start growing out of the ground, and the monster's just like, whatever. Starts just smashing it to pieces. And he's like, it tore through my illusion magic. And the only thing I could think during the episode was, I'm just like, dude, you just learned how to do this properly, my guy. And this is like, as they mentioned later, level 25, or floor 25 of the dungeon, one of the most insane monsters that are in the dungeon. So I don't know what his expectation was there, but everything just kind of takes place. Everyone's just running, and they begin discussing, like, everyone's in despair. Like, what are we going to do? There's no way. In fact, they mention right here where he's from floor 25. And they even show the Sentinels and the Guardians that are down there basically trying to sniff him out. So you find out that the Grand Duke obviously is controlling all these monsters. Essentially, he's the lead, and these guys are all now, like, looking for our heroes. So it is what it is. And everyone's like, we're trapped. What are we going to do? This was another moment that in any other episode, the other 10 episodes we've seen of the series, we would have gotten this exact perspective of Will. And we never got this perspective of Will. In fact, we never saw this shot of the sword, at least that I recollect. I didn't notice it even on the second and third watch-throughs. So, though I can miss things from time to time because I am going back and forth from the episode to the chapter, these exact perspectives were never shown. And in any other episode we've had in the past, these perspectives would have been so important and would have been replicated and emulated. So keep all of that in mind. But essentially, they just kind of come up with their plan, and everyone just, like, goes along with Will. And old girl here happens to realize, she's like, okay, well, maybe he's not our shield. Maybe he's our leader. All that goes down in the episode. Nothing really changes here. Narratively, there's not a lot of changes between the manga and the anime. So, from a narrative perspective, everything happens very similarly. But I want to pay really close attention to this cell as well. this expression with his glasses around his neck there and all this, because it's very much foreshadowing what's going to happen later on in the episode. None of this happens in the anime. We don't get this perspective. And this is another one of those shots. Whenever you get a shot where the character is overlapping any of the other cells, it shows you how important this is. Like, from the perspective of somebody actually writing this, from the actual like mangaka, the reason they're gonna do this is because this is the cell. This is the one that's gonna give you. In fact, I think we actually did get this perspective, but we never got this one. You know, we got things that were close, but we never got an exact emulation of it. And I always felt like the animators were always paying close attention to the manga cells, and maybe when they're drawing, they're actually drawing maybe over an overlay of the manga cell itself in order to get it just right. And I never really saw that. In fact, this was one sequence right here. In this sequence right here, we almost get something close, but Kiki's on his shoulder, and Kiki's just having a regular Kiki expression. She's not having this, like, overjoyed expression right here. Now, in defense of the studio, and I'll explain why I say the studio here instead of specifically calling Actus or anything like that. When I get to later on in the episode, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But they have kind of changed up Kiki's whole persona, so I can devalue that a little bit. Kiki's a little more of like a comic relief-ish character and just kind of shows up when she's needed in the manga, where she does play a larger role in the anime, at least from like screen time. She doesn't do anything different, but she gets more screen time and more shine. So essentially they all decide, okay, well, we're going to have to do this. And this is where Will's like, look, I can teach you a spell. Like, I can't do it, but I can teach it to you. And that's where Julia starts doing the longer incantation and finds out that he can actually use his doppelgangers to basically start the incantation. And then when they break, then the next doppelganger can continue it, and so on and so forth. So that's kind of what he's doing here. And this is another really solid shot. In the anime, for the most part, we only saw one at a time. We didn't see multitudes of them doing this. So this is another key moment where I'm really questioning what's going on here. Like, this does not feel like the same studio doing this animation. Basically, as things just kind of keep progressing here, obviously, he breaks down. You have the actual, for real, Julius hiding behind this pillar. And then he pops out and he finishes the incantation. And, you know, as we already know, it hits and it looks incredible, but it doesn't really do a whole lot. You know, but every little bit counts. And this is another sequence. So we got something very similar to this, but I checked 3 and even 4 times. I went back. We never got this perspective. And in past episodes, this would have been one of the pivotal moments of the episode where we would have gotten this exact perspective. We got a few things that were close, but we never got this nice close-up, clean, you know, well animated with his hair flowing and him flying through the air shot. We never got this. And this is one of those things we would have definitely gotten. And let me just kind of explain why I'm harping on this so bad right now. As far as the episode goes, as far as like everything and anything is concerned, if you actually go watch the credits on the episode, it mentions several other animation studios. And we talked earlier about Actus, I think, is the main studio that's actually working on this, but Bandai's animation studio. They are specifically noted as working on this episode, and there's actually another animation studio and even Mappa that are all listed in the end credits of this particular episode. There is a studio out of Shanghai, China, that actually apparently worked on some of the sequences here. And I checked their Twitter account; they don't actually have anything listed for the episode, so maybe it's something like they're not advertising yet, but I'm sure this would be good advertising for them. But there seems to be a lot of different hands working on the series at some point. Now, whether Mappa was helping them with some of the bigger action sequences, which let's face it, Mappa's got the chops to do that. Whether the studio was maybe filling in for pieces of the episode that they couldn't quite get done, that's a distinct possibility, and that actually could amount to the big differences we saw here, because I noticed quite a few quality differences in the animation here to there. So having tertiary studios working on this, initially when I watched the episode yesterday, I kind of thought maybe this was like, Bandai's whole maybe Bandai did the episode. But then as we get a little further in the episode, there's quite a few moments about in the midsection of this episode, I believe starting like with this cell and a few others, where you really do start to see, we never got that sequence, but we got a few close to it. But essentially during this fight, you see quite a few sequences where I think we got this cell and things like that. Like, you can physically tell there's a point at which the animation specifically gets better and becomes a lot more manga accurate. We got that shot. We got this shot, especially with old girl here. We got a lot of her. We got this shot right here almost exactly. So this is like the point at which I'm pretty sure Actus picked up and was really like doing the meat and potatoes of the episode, like the real like elaborate proper stuff. So initially when I dropped the episode yesterday, I said, okay, well, some of the animation is a bit janky. Maybe they'll change it for the Blu-ray release. And I hate to say it, maybe they'll clean up a few shots, but they're not going to reanimate shots. We will probably never get an episode that is remotely as good as this episode could have potentially been. Now, in fairness, we all know anime studios work on insane deadlines. These guys are overworked, underpaid, and a lot of times these studios have staffing issues. So it's highly likely that they just had some problems getting people to work on the episode. It's very, very, very likely. So the honest answer to me is I love the series, but this episode really, they had a weak overlay in the beginning of the series. I don't see how this episode wasn't produced better, but I'm sure there's a reason for it. This is like definitely an example of a rare instance where the manga is just flat out better than the episode. Now, one thing I did like here, and I do feel like this was an Actus moment, because this was led up to from like episode 1 when we got the first intro. Well, actually, I think episode 2 was the first intro. When we got the very first intro and we saw those goggles break, and for how much those goggles meant to Will during the series, this moment where they break in the manga is just kind of like, okay, sell and sell, they're broken. No, it took like a solid like 15-20 seconds for everything to transpire. Now, they do kind of have some shots here. We're now getting into chapter 18 of the broken goggles and them on the ground in the... I wish we got this shot. We never quite got this shot. I would love to have had this shot, but I don't know how they could have done. There's probably no way they could have done this in a 16:9 format. Just the perspective would have been all off. Actually, the more I think about it, they probably could have, but I don't know. I just really wish we'd have gotten this shot with the glasses in the foreground. But nevertheless, this whole moment, when the glasses actually tear and break, was absolutely beautiful. It was one of those rare moments in this episode where I feel like the anime outshined the manga for like a brief moment. And I've been very complimentary of the anime. I've said for quite a few episodes that the anime actually did better than the manga somehow. In fact, it did feel like the series was written to have an anime adaptation because of how well this adaptation was done. But lo and behold, essentially everything just kind of falls apart here, and this is kind of where the anime, like, I would have loved to have this shot. We never got that shot. We got something close, but not quite. And you guys know how the episode progresses, so I really want to focus on this episode the difference between the manga and the anime. So really here, nothing really changed a whole lot. You just kind of get, you did get something very close to this. You didn't quite get that shot, but you didn't get something very close to it. If there's one thing I will say, if I am right, and I gotta compliment this, if I am right, and there were 2, maybe 3, even if Mappa did work on this, 4 studios working on this episode side by side. Short of the Grand Duke, I do feel like the Grand Duke's character model was all over the place at the beginning of the episode. But the character designs were really, really, really close. Shy of how things were shot and comparing to the manga, just watching the episode, it would have been very, very difficult to tell where one studio stops and another studio starts. So as far as the main character models, I think they did a fantastic job of blending those scenes. I'd have to do a little bit more research, honestly, on the episode. And that's something I'm going to do. I'm going to do a whole deep dive on that because I really want to know more about this episode's production, because I do feel like this is one of those situations where it's like there's another story here that hasn't been told. So we'll cover all that. I just got to deep dive that bad boy. Now, as far as all this goes, we got a shot very close to this, but not quite to the same extreme, and we did get quite a bit of this, and this shot here where Sion's just beating the snot out of Will, I do not doubt one bit that was Actus just showing their A game, because this whole scene right here was phenomenal, absolutely fantastic. And we almost got that shot for shot. We got him picking him up here shot for shot. A lot of this was definitely part of their just absolute A game. We got that completely, that moment right there. That's kind of obscured by the logo. That was fantastic. And then that. So this moment right here, this whole sequence of Sion beating the snot out of Will, zero doubt in my mind that was Actus just going ham. They got the chops. They know how to do this. So, some of the more pivotal moments of the series definitely were handled by the A team, but it did still feel like there was a B and maybe even a C team involved. One thing I will say, I like the Grand Duke out of the manga, but I feel like the anime Grand Duke was a little bit more dynamic, personally. So as Will comes in here, there's a lot of this back and talk about how Will, he's afraid, blah, blah, blah. They call him a coward. I don't think that's true, because if he was a coward, he wouldn't go do anything like that. But I get what they're saying. Like, he's terrified. Like, who wouldn't be in this situation? And we really got this shot almost perfectly once again. So I wouldn't be surprised if Actus was still kind of covering this part right here. And then, of course, the shot here where Will just kind of goes in and just, starts going after him. Really goes. And the funny part about this episode is it's so all over the place as far as the story, or say, the side-by-side goes. Because some of these scenes, this whole sequence here after he gets punched and they have this little talk, all this happens in about 10 to 15 seconds. When I was watching it side by side, you'd have to go bump, 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 bump. But then some of the action sequences can take, a minute. It's really crazy. But obviously, like I said, narratively, they really did their homework on this. So we do know that season 2 is in the works. I'll cover all that when we start talking further about the manga. But the series was fantastic. I have absolutely no complaints. So obviously we know that it's really no good, and he starts unleashing this shot, and he's like, one of these hits me, I'm a goner. Now I will say I love the way that the shot comes out and the composition of all that, and how he just is kind of flying through it. And this scene right here, we got that. We didn't quite get it perfect, but we got a really darn close. But I will say after this, I did feel like this is where another studio kind of came in. Because while we have Will up there and him coming down, we got something similar to this, but we didn't quite get this completely. And in this shot, if you really go back and analyze it, the evil Grand Duke here, he feels a little like off model when this happens. And it's really unfortunate. Now, we got something really close to this. Like, this was a great shot right here. But, and then, of course, he does his blast. But this shot right here, I think, is definitely one of the ones where the Grand Duke was super off model in the anime. He just seemed very different from before. But nevertheless, as we kind of keep going along here, everybody just kind of comes back in, and this is roughly about the time where Will is like, "Hey, you know, we have to combine forces." Now, I will say, between these episodes, so it's actually between, I think, chapter 17 and 18, we did get a little shot of, and I forgot to mention this earlier, of Werkner and Edward that are like basically flying towards them. That never happened in the manga, or at least hasn't happened yet in the manga. Maybe that comes later in chapter 19. But that little like kind of breakaway sequence never happened in the manga. So just another difference. But as we get to the climax of the episode, literally the chapter is called Wand and Sword. I think the episode is 2. This is where Will's finally like, we have to combine efforts. We have to combine efforts. And you've got... I still want to know what's up with him. Like, is he actually in the dungeon? Or is this just a moment? Or is this... Because that's his roommate, isn't it? I think that is. Like, there's something more about this guy. There's something more about this dude that we're going to have to find out later on. But he's like, it's wand and sword. And, of course, now you get, like, this little mysterious background. And this whole thing was, I mean, shot for shot, really well redone. I talked a few episodes ago about how they kind of flash forward, and flash backward, all over the place. Thankfully, we only got the one here, and it didn't really disrupt the action at all. It was fantastic, built a lot of tension. Now we've got more questions like, what is going on? When are we getting answers to these questions? And I absolutely love it. And then, of course, we have the final moment where Will gets the magic imbued sword, and like basically. So here's another thing that I want to criticize. We got a good shot of Will with the sword, but we never got anything remotely like this. This stance was phenomenal. We got this one pretty close. We never got this one. And this is almost like, like Gear 2 Luffy, or like Super Saiyan Goku, or, the first time you get like a really crazy new level of power. And this shot really kind of imbues it. Like, look, his hair's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit messier. There's a distinct difference between these two shots. And we never got that full experience. Now, in fairness, and this is just me reading into it, I'd have to go read in more production details on this, but there's this distinct possibility that maybe the studio didn't want to, maybe they didn't want to have those parallels. Maybe they wanted to keep him a little bit more grounded or whatever, and not, buy into that trope. Totally possible. I would 100% wouldn't fault them for that. But I'm just a little disappointed we never got this shot. But of course, this is that moment we all know, and he rushes in, and for whatever reason, he's kind of like flying here in the anime. And that bothered me. It felt very out of place for him. Like, he's never flown. He can like, and I'm going to be a super nerd here. It's like if you remember, like, people that know like old like golden era Superman, he never flew. He just kind of leaped tall buildings at a single bound. Like, he could leap really far. Or like, Thor in Marvel Comics, he doesn't fly. He just kind of flings his hammer and drags himself along. Will's very much the same way. He can jump, but he doesn't have the power of flight. Now, in fairness, you can make an argument. Oh, he eats up the air with a sword, blah, 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 whatever. But no, he was just like free-flying here, and it really bothered me. You never quite see that in the manga. He's just like spinning and dodging, and then just comes down for this final hit. And I don't know, I didn't like that change or that interpretation. It felt very disingenuous to the character. Like suddenly he can fly. Like that just that to me that was all wrong. Now, I'm gonna say this. I know the shot from the anime is very different here, but I think the shot from the anime is even more visceral, and if anything, shows more of the brutality of that hit. Rare situation where the what they did in this episode in the anime I think was better than this. I've said that a few times throughout the series. I mean, Actus has really proven that they know their chops. I don't know if this actually was animated by them, but fantastic, absolutely all the way fantastic. And this is kind of anything I go beyond from here is going to be a spoiler, so I'm going to stop. This is pretty much where the episode kind of cuts off, and then we get a we will pick this up with episode 12 next week, which should be the last episode of the season. I mean, we already know it's gonna be a cooldown episode, but they have season 2 pretty much greenlit, so. I did say I do believe that season 2 there will probably be a year gap between season 1 and season 2. Definitely look forward to that though, guys. Make sure you guys subscribe if you haven't already. Danmachi comes out in I think 2 weeks. Season 5 of that. We'll be covering that, and just like I did the manga breakdowns here, I'm gonna go read ahead in the light novels, and we'll do light novel breakdowns on that. So, if you guys are stoked for all that, make sure you guys subscribe, stay up to date. Third time I've grifted that, but repetition is key, I guess. And I'll catch you guys for more Wistoria coming out soon.